I feel it's safer to keep my head down and get through a program, get through research without making too much of a fuss. I think also it's because there's a lot of pressure to kind of not only keep your head down, but also fit in. And like, there's this idea of what is a model scientist. And, I think we're moving away from it in some ways, but I think it's still very much a very Western attitude. And so I try to understand, where does my native identity fit into being a scientist or an engineer in these spaces? And since I'm not completely confident in that identity or that part of myself, I think it's safer for me just to code switch and not have to, run up against people who may question my experiences as being a native person too.
Hello, and welcome to Informatics in the Round, a podcast designed to help everyone become a part of the dialogue about topics in biomedical informatics. I'm Kevin Johnson, physician and informatics chair at Vanderbilt, at KBJ Vanderbilt on Twitter, www.kevinbjohnsonmd.net on the web, and you can find this podcast everywhere, but of course you knew that because you did. So we conclude the 2020 year with another episode that straddles informatics education and social issues. Oliver Beardontwalk is one of our Ph.D. candidates doing data science research at Columbia University's Department of Biomedical Informatics. He's joined by Suzanne Bakken, one of the world's most prominent figures in nursing informatics and Professor of Biomedical Informatics also at Columbia University. Suzanne also holds the distinction of serving as the editor-in-chief for our premier journal of biomedical informatics, known as JAMIA. This episode features a sensitive topic, and we all had a chance to bare our souls, present speaker included, during this episode. I would summarize our discussion as being focused on one two-word phrase: code switching. If you've never heard of code switching, it's the process of fitting in by borrowing a phenotype or a way of appearing that is not your nature. We hear about it a lot in the corporate workplace, where women have to act a lot like male counterparts, or even in communities where phrases like man up or Uncle Tom reflect an inability to code switch. This may not sound like informatics, but let me assure you it impacts the field in very insidious ways that we hear from all three of the speakers at different times. Please listen to this one carefully. It gets intense in a few places. I gave you a taste for the conversation in my lead-in to this episode, but at least then we could laugh about it. So, where's the songwriter, you ask? And I say, get ready for something special. I'm actually geeking out about the songwriter, friend of mine, artist, who has agreed to come today. His life has epitomized code switching, as he'll share. Many of you will have seen him on TV, but I'm not going to tell you who he is until he actually tells you himself. I'll stop there and let you meet him to launch this conversation.
My name's Nolan Neal. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, born and raised. You may have heard me singing for a band called Hinder back in 2013 when I was the new guy for a minute. Or a couple years later, I was on The Voice season 10, got sent home, and I came back for season 11, and I got 4 chairs turned doing Tiny Dancer. People may have seen that. Then somehow NBC asked me to come back again for another show called America's Got Talent, which was a lot of fun. It was awesome.
One of the reasons why I was really glad you were able to spend a few minutes with me today is because on America's Got Talent, you did something that just shocked everybody. I remember Simon's the look on his face when you talked about your journey, how you got to where you were. And a lot of people have done that kind of stuff, but the way you did it and the fact that you had a song to back it up was just phenomenal. And I was wondering if I could get you just to kind of relive that moment. What did you say and what did you sing?
Man, I had a bunch of people telling me what I should sing before I got there and the couple weeks leading up to it, and I trusted their opinions a lot. But man, I can't explain it. I just felt like I needed to do this song. And I did a song called Lost. Yeah. But I did a newer version of it, a rewritten version I'm about to release now. It's called Lost for the Last Time, where I added for the last time.
Yes, that was perfect, by the way.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. The rest of the song is exactly the same. It's just that Lost for the Last Time, which I really think glues it together. It's like it was missing it before. But yeah, and then I told everybody the cool thing about going in there when I was 39 years old was that I knew for a fact that I didn't care about being famous because I experienced that and it did not bring me the happiness I thought it would. And I know that we hear people say that all the time, and it just doesn't hit you until you've lived it, really. I mean, Denzel Washington's like one of my favorite human beings.
Yeah. Everybody says I look just like him.
Really? Yeah, I can see it.
I'm lying.
He does those inspirational speeches, man. I'm like, yeah, man. But, I didn't listen. And anyway, so all I said to them was, if I can just connect with some people tonight and some people can connect with this song and get some hope out of it, that's the win for me. I already knew that as long as I could just hit the high note, and because some nights that note doesn't want to come out. Exactly.
That's a tough note.
It is.
And with all that emotion, the fact that you have to stay in control.
I always tell them to just, whenever they try to sing high, they always think you're supposed to sing harder and more air.
Yeah.
And I was like, I always say, just whistle real quick, and they'll go whistle. I was like, now whistle it, but blow as hard as you can.
Right.
I was like, so I get him to sing a note like doing this. I call it the poop technique. That's what my mom taught me. Right? And then you want to have no air coming out at all.
Yeah.
You should be able to put your hand in front of your mouth, right? And feel no air hit it.
That's right.
And it's crazy. Like I've taught a few people that just got it that moment, and instantly they were singing high. Yeah. One of them is Bobby from Slava, he would tell you right now, like, I was singing like an A was as high as I can get. Now I can hit like a freaking C sharp because of that. One night in the kitchen, we were having some beers. I don't drink anymore, but it was funny. I just said, "No, dude, it's just like this," and he just did it, and I was like, "There you go, you got it. You're good." It's like,
yeah.
Anyways, there's a super long answer for you.
That's okay.
Short question.
Well, I'll tell you, my story was I was singing The Messiah at Lincoln Center, and a friend of mine and I got pretty wasted, went out in the street, and sang The Trumpet Shall Sound, which was like my kill. I could not hit those notes, and we sat there and we sang it together. Nowhere near as cool as what you just talked about, but it was the same kind of a thing. Like, I was still aware enough that I was like, wow. Why is this so easy tonight? And it was called Totally Relaxed and Totally Controlling My Breath, because I knew I was drunk, and so I had to work at it. Your style, which people are going to hear in a second, you put it all out there. And, I mean, you're hitting the whole range, and you are naturally gravelly. So, which makes this really unique. I mean, you're one of those singers. When I first heard you, I think I told you, I was listening to Seal, because the thing you have in common with him, and you're very distinctive, but the thing you have in common with him is you know how to control gravelly, music. You're able to put grit into it, and it's natural, but it's just amazing. It's just amazing.
He's one of my favorite all time. Actually, I'm currently working on it. Well, I'm about to start it. I've been working on it, but about to start recording my album called Under the Cover Songs.
Oh, really?
Unbelievable, right?
I want to get that one.
But yeah, I'm doing like Fire and Rain and Desperado and Kissed by a Rose.
Yep.
Or Kissed from a Rose.
Yeah. Well, you can be kissed by a rose too. If it's just watch out for those thorns. Hey, okay. So what do you want to sing for us that was that really reflects your journey?
Oh, man, now I want to sing Seal. Man, you know what? I was actually at Hotel Indigo where we met.
Yes.
And I was sitting on stage and I had the overwhelming feeling. This was about exactly a year ago. I was my first gig back after getting sober, like clean, really clean. I was at a halfway house and they let me go to the Hotel Indigo as long as it was 8 a.m. to do the morning shift. Jeez. And I was sitting up there and I just had this overwhelming urge to like play Desperado for the first time in my life. I'd never played it. I'd never tried to play it. And I've always wanted to learn it. And I grabbed my phone out and I looked the lyrics up and the bartender walked up. I think her name was Anna. And she said, "Hey, do you know Desperado?"
You gotta be kidding.
I am not. I swear to you on every bit of music that's in my bones and all my music gear. And
yeah,
I swear it's the truth. And I remember looking at her, it was like, out of all the millions of songs in the world.
Yeah.
And so I just turned my phone around and showed her, because she saw I couldn't have hit any buttons that quick.
Right.
She's like, what? It was just one of those, like seeing a UFO. I was like, come on, what? And then I got home. I just worked my way through it up there on stage. I butchered it. It was terrible. But when I got home, I was playing the exact right key, which was cool. I even knew to put the capo on. But long story short, when I got home, I started reading the lyrics for the first time, really reading them.
Yeah.
And it's so wild how if I would have learned that song when I was younger, it couldn't have been this. But for some reason, it felt like my dad was talking to me. Mm. Because I was having like questions about my girlfriend. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know if she's the one or not, Right. And I've been doing that for years. And it says you better let somebody love you. And you ain't getting no younger. These things that pleasing you, and it's just, even the thing you always want, the ones that you can't get, like the record deals I had never were enough. I had to deal with Virgin Records and Hollywood Records. And it was just really powerful. And I almost cried, and it was so powerful. So I actually recorded this one, and I'm going to play it for you now.
Yeah, you got to play it. You got the reverb on?
Yeah, it's on now. Desperado, why don't you come to your senses? You've been out riding fences for so long now. Oh, you're a hard one. I know that you got your reasons. These things that I please in you hurt you somehow. Don't you call the queen of diamonds, boy. She'll beat you if she's able. You know the queen of hearts is always your best bet. It seems to me some fine things have been laid upon your table, but you only want the ones that you can't get. Desperado, oh, you ain't getting no younger. Your pain and your hunger, they're driving you home. Oh, and freedom, oh, freedom, well, that's just some people talking. Your prison is walking through this world all alone. Feet get cold in the wintertime. The sky won't snow and the sun won't shine. It's hard to tell the nighttime from the day. You're losing all your highs and lows. Ain't it funny how the feeling goes away? Desperado, why don't you come to your senses? Come down from your fences. Open the gate. It may be raining, oh, but there's a rainbow above you. You better let somebody love you. Let somebody love you. Better let somebody love you before it's too late.
Well, that. First of all, thank you so much. That was amazing, and I know the people listening to this are going to be feeling that because I felt it. That was great.
Okay, sounds good, brother. Thank you.
Okay, and without further ado, let's keep this going with Professor Bakken and Oliver Bear Don't Walk.
Have any of you gotten involved with music in any way in your life?
I used to play the saxophone back in middle school.
That's pretty good. Were you any good at it?
Oh, I was absolutely terrible. I thought it was good, though.
Well, I actually got an F in music in middle school. However, I don't have much of an ear, but I really can keep a beat. So my music is really as a dancer.
Well, I've certainly seen you in a red dress dancing on more than one occasion.
Oh, yes, that would be many true, and
Yeah.
often being led around by Ed Hammond.
Well, when Ed listens to this now, he can make a point of saying, I know exactly what she's talking about. Well, okay, why don't we go ahead and get started, guys? So for our listeners, let me just introduce everybody by name. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Kevin.
That's what she sounds like. Hi, Oliver.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey. So before we start, or as we start, Oliver, you brought up something that I think is incredibly important, and by the way, unique. We've never had this happen before. Would you mind giving us a land acknowledgement?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Usually these kind of meetings happen in person when we're all together, but things are a bit different now. So I wanted to acknowledge the different peoples of whose land we're occupying at this point. So Kevin, you're on the ancestral homeland of the Cherokee, Shawnee, and Yuchi. Sue, you and I are on the ancestral homeland of the Lenape. These different people, have been here for a very long time. And because of forces like colonization, westward expansion, and manifest destiny, they're all over the US, and some of them aren't located on their ancestral homeland anymore. But there are forces today, or there are lots of actions today to try and revitalize culture, language, as well as the people. So I'm thankful for these people as a past, present, and future stewards of this land, and for the chance to be able to gather here and have this conversation with you all.
I agree. Thank you very much. It's amazing how much history there is kind of embedded in our society that it takes somebody like you to remind all of us about that. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the topic today relates to that. And I'm going to end up putting Oliver on the spot here a little bit. But it actually started with a podcast that we did about anti-Black racism a few podcasts ago. And we had a student on there named Philip Adejumo, who is an Olympic swimmer and an informatics data scientist, but he's also a Black man like me. And one of the things that he brought up was the fact that as a Black man, he wanted to be able to think about issues that related to being Black as he moved into an informatics career, but he recognized, and he was challenged on this, but he recognized that he would never be able to get those grants. And he recognized that he didn't have the role models to really identify a body of work that would uniquely benefit our population. And I then remembered the conversation that you, Oliver, and I have had. And Sue, we've had similar conversations in different areas about populations who maybe enter fields and can't necessarily get the same respect that they should or be able to do the things they'd like to do. So I thought we'd talk about that a little bit just to unpack it. I've had a couple other conversations in my life that I don't talk about too much. So when I first went to Hopkins, Levi Watkins, who is a well-known cardiac surgeon and actually the first African-American medical student ever at Vanderbilt, when I ran into him at Hopkins, he essentially said, it was a little bit Aaron Burr-like. It was, this is what I believe, but this is not the time for me to express it. That I need to be a little further in my career, as he put it, a little safer, with more credibility and more allies, and then we're going to do some things. And that's what he did in his career. Frank Oski, who was the chair of pediatrics when I was at Hopkins, made a point of always being a person who questioned dogma. He had question authority, question dogma work, sort of the phrases everybody used about Frank. But Frank told me that although he'd been like that his entire life, he really waited until he had data that allowed him to question dogma before he started questioning it. So even though he instinctively knew something might be wrong, he knew that that was not going to be the right way to move forward. So in both cases, there was a sort of stifling of what you believed versus what you did. And then, Oliver, your story comes out. Would you share, are you comfortable sharing your story with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been really interested in problem solving as well as finding patterns. So, a lot of mathematics. And in undergrad, that got me started into data science, essentially. And looking around, I saw that a lot of the jobs were focused on, take this person's data, serve them an ad, or find something that, we might want to be able to sell them, which, are like challenging problems in and of themselves. But I figured that if someone's going to be giving me their data, they might as well benefit from it. And I like think of it as a partnership. So biomedical informatics kind of became the best choice for me because I'm working with people's healthcare data and trying to make sure that they can benefit in some way from providing me with that. I think that stems from this idea of giving back and realizing that my success takes place within a community. A big part of the reason I'm here is because of so much community support from, my family back home in Washington to my tribe back in Montana. And I really figure that if, whatever I do with my education should be in some way be giving back to my communities. That being said, I've grown up in some very, places with just like not a lot of Native Americans.
Right.
And that's been kind of difficult for me. I've been navigating these spaces which are very white, not set up for, BIPOC. And I think in some ways...
For people who don't know, what is BIPOC?
Oh yeah, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Yeah, and I think navigating those spaces has taken what I think of as, I think what's been called code switching, which is, when I'm with a bunch of natives, like I'll talk very differently, I'll act very differently. When I'm in a space with non-natives or people who I don't think would understand that, I will act very differently. And I think I've been doing that a lot of my entire life because of the field I've chosen to be in. And I think there's a lot of wear and tear that happens there, being away from your culture and then also having to act a certain way as a self-preservation technique.
Now, just quick, do you pass as white?
I think in the winter I actually pass as white more often, but but I'm usually used to getting asked like what kind of brown I am, and usually people pass me as some kind of Latinx.
Got it.
But I'm half Native American. I'm part of the Crow tribe in Montana, and then half white as well.
So you were saying that that as you were sort of involving this interest in a field like informatics, you were also finding more and more that you were very isolated because there really weren't people like you. But you knew that going in, and how did you kind of reconcile the fact that you knew you were going to be all alone?
Yeah, absolutely. I think early on, in undergrad, it's easier to find your community, I think. And I was very lucky to have a great Native American community at Stanford for undergrad. But, as I found as I progressed more and more into my education, I got more and more into STEM fields, there were fewer people of color around me. And choosing to do a PhD, I knew that was absolutely going to be an issue. I think I figured I could find my community anywhere. Even if it was a very small community, I would be able to find some group of Native Americans. And the undergrad campus here has a very strong group of Native American undergrads. But what I found is that, going through this PhD program, I haven't had as much time as I would like to be able to connect with them. And I don't think that was quite something I expected, but maybe I should have, just with all the work that goes into a PhD.
Let me stop you there for a second. Sue, you've been around a whole lot of PhD programs and a lot of graduates. Is his reality of being isolated something that you experienced before?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is a reality for many. And this afternoon, I just, my 37th PhD student just defended this afternoon. And so I've been doing this quite a while, and I've had a fair, I was talking to Oliver earlier, my first PhD student in nursing was actually Native. And then I have, my second at Columbia has kind of returned to her Indigenous roots as well, and has decided to acknowledge that after probably several decades of thinking about it. And that's Leanne Curry, and she and Oliver have met now. But I've had a fair number of PhD students who were Black or Latino, also people who have been LGBT, but people may feel and that can be very, that can be very hard. But I remember one of my Latino postdocs, this was in nursing, not in DBMI, who said, if the old white ladies aren't part of the solution, basically we're screwed. And because we all have to be part, we all have to be part of the community. But and the things I've learned through the years is somebody who's in graduate school, they may need different things. And I remember having a student come to me and she said, well, I've just read this things, and when the mental models of the styles of the advisor and the advisee don't match, and like it could be an issue or something like that. And from my perspective, having done this a lot because I'm old and I've been around a long time, is
to be clear, you're an old white lady.
Yeah, it's not, it's my job to work with someone to figure out what they need, and whether it's structure, whether it's motivation, whether it's tough love because they need to kick in the butt, but to kind of, whether it's boundaries, but you kind of work together to figure out what that is, and that's what you end up providing to that person. And so every PhD student doesn't get the same thing from me because they don't need the same thing. And so, but I do run into, but I've run into many times the issue that we're talking about here, where they're trying to kind of find their way and may not feel like they have a home or a lot of role models. And one of the things we do that we talk about is acknowledging who you are, but also the importance of like really being successful in what it is that you're doing, because that's one of the ways by being successful you're able to become a role model. And
so that's a great segue. So Oliver, why did you have to code switch? And I'm asking that question somewhat naively. Is it prejudice? Was it for your own kind of comfort to fit in? What was holding you back?
Part of it was definitely, I guess, unique to me being Native American. So like I said, I grew up in Washington State. My tribe is in Montana. And I didn't really have a lot of interactions with other natives. And so I grew up in a very white community, and I grew up what I would consider very white. And it took me a while to understand more and more what it meant to be Native. And I think that kind of comes with a sense of, am I Native enough? Like, is it okay for me to be Native in these spaces, and not being very sure of that identity? But throughout my time in like undergrad and my master's, I've become more comfortable with that identity. Now, being Native in non-Native spaces, I think the reason I usually code switch is because in some ways I don't want to stick out too much. It can be kind of scary to stick out like that. Like sometimes it's nice and get recognition, but other times I feel it's safer to keep my head down and get through a program, get through research without making too much of a fuss. I think also it's because there's a lot of pressure to kind of not only keep your head down, but also fit in. And like, there's this idea of what is a model scientist. And, I think we're moving away from it in some ways, but I think it's still very much a very Western attitude. And so I try to understand, where does my Native identity fit into being a scientist or an engineer in these spaces? And since I'm not completely confident in that identity or that part of myself, I think it's safer for me just to code switch and not have to, I think, run up against people who may question my experiences as being a Native person too.
Well, I will say, I have heard now from a number of our grad students, this whole idea of putting my head down. And it really bothered me. The fact that we have students who are coming in from very different cultural backgrounds, I view that from a precision medicine lens, right? As we have all these people who can ask brand new questions that Sue might not think of, and I certainly won't think about, but they're kind of afraid to ask those questions because that suddenly exposes them for more than what they want to be exposed for in this community. Sue, talk to me about this. You've had a couple of Native students. Did you encourage them to do work that they thought was going to be important to their people?
People have made different choices, and they particularly might make certain choices at the time of their dissertation, but they may be attracted to doing something more related to their culture a little bit later on. I've had a fair number of students who were Latino, and because I have had a substantial number of research projects in that area. Often I may get, in that instance, I may get people who end up studying that as at the dissertation level or during the postdocs. But for some people, it does happen a little later, like Oliver was talking about that, and what you've been talking about as well from some of your advice you got at Hopkins as well, where they seem to say, I'm learning the methods, I'm beginning to focus on this, and I'll have opportunities to broaden and apply these methods maybe in a more novel way when I'm a little bit further along in my career.
So, hey, Oliver, in the Black community, when I was a kid, and I was raised in neighborhoods that were primarily white, and I would occasionally go to see my grandmother who lived in inner city Baltimore. And I had to get very used to the term Uncle Tom. I was the kid who talked like this. I did not have a very good Baltimore accent because I really didn't try to have a good Baltimore accent, and I wasn't very streetwise. And I wore it on my sleeve. So I almost couldn't code switch because I didn't see enough. I used to joke that I had to go back to my grandmother's to understand the new handshake because I just, I would go to the barbershop and think, what are they doing? How do I do that? Slow it down, break it apart. I mean, it was pathetic. So fast forward to you. This whole idea of Uncle Tomness turns out to be super important if I were to now, as an older person, try to do research, which I have, in our community, and I can't at that point kind of code switch in reverse, right? Act more Black than I typically do. Do you worry, or did you worry that if you didn't start to express the culture that was meaning the most to you early on, that you might actually be unable to do it when you were older?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I've always wanted to do research with Native Americans. And as Sue was talking about, I figured I had to get a base first and that will come later. But there's definitely this fear that if I go and try and work with my tribe or with another tribe on a research project, I'll look like just another outsider coming in, not because of the way I physically look, but because of the way I act, because of the world I've lived in for so long. And so it was definitely a fear of mine and still is. And I think one of the things I'm grappling with is, when do I take time to go back and kind of reacclimate, go and visit my cousins and my aunties back in Montana and just live with them for a little while and become reaccustomed to my culture.
So, right now the NIH and all the work that we're doing in precision medicine has been facing this challenge of how do we involve Native Americans in the data collection that we could actually use to improve disease management and health maintenance in the population. And there's so few people like you that it would seem as if you almost have a calling and there's an opportunity. Do you feel that way, or do you feel like, not yet, I'm afraid, I need more skills, I'm not going to get tenure? I mean, tell me what you're thinking about.
Yeah. I would say 4 months ago, I was definitely in the mindset of, not yet, I need more tenure. Something I'd always learned from my dad was, keep your head down, get these degrees, you'll be able to make change later. And I think with the recent killing of George Floyd and so many others, and the protests have been happening, and the awakening of the non-Black community to what's going on in this country, I really started to realize that if not now, then when? And if not who, or if not me, then who? I really want to start pushing myself to not only have a firm grasp of the methods I'm doing research on, but also kind of branching out and saying you know what? I have to be someone who's going to teach myself more about working in indigenous communities, doing research in indigenous communities. And there are great researchers out there who I can reach out to and talk to about this stuff.
Oliver and I talked when he was interviewing for the Ph.D. program, and they get to, I think, say they need to get to pick some people who they want to talk to. And the thing that we talked about was, because I had done a large community-based study of Latinos, and he said, at some point, I'm very interested in doing something, similar to this. And so as I look at some of the things, and I've seen, some of the things that, some of Oliver's, citations for some of the work he's doing, and he's doing some work in social determinants of health and that kind of thing. So I see that he's doing, some very interesting work that is a piece of the puzzle. And how I always think about, you're putting together some pieces along the way And no one really gets to do it all in their PhD. Even if they want, it just doesn't happen because it's the beginning, not the end. And so when I'm hearing him talking, I'm thinking, gosh, he should do a postdoc with an ethnographer or do something in computational sociology, but it sounds like he might want more ethnographic kind of thing. And there are fabulous people to do that kind of thing, because I think he has such a chance to really be able to pull together computational skills and when we think of many of those, they're very quantitative, they're very objective, but what I hear him kind of yearning for is to be able to do something that would be more naturalistic, more ethnographic, more subjective, and where you're embedded rather than objectively either asking questions or pulling the data in which you lack the context. He's been in school many years. He's probably not so much thinking about what might kind of be the next step, but I think getting that additional different kind of training to complement what you've learned, then you're already unique in many ways, but this is a way in which you would be, methodologically unique in being able to address some of these incredibly important problems.
So Sue, you're editor-in-chief of our journal, the Journal of the American Medical Informatics Association, or JAMIA. Do you think that work from groups of people who are relatively underrepresented is work that you are likely to preferentially put into the journal, or would you say that it's going to have low impact, therefore I can't afford to put much of this in the journal?
Yeah, well, I think about it a number of different ways. And when I think of my career in general, there's been a lot of times where I say I've had a lot of good no's, meaning no was led to me many, many times. But in the end, it turned out to be the best answer for me.
Now, I have to tell you, I thought you were going to say, people have said no to me, and I've said something I was going to have to bleep out. I just I said, blah, 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 you. And I was going to say, Sue, luckily I can edit, so we'll take care of it.
No. But the one of my good no's, although it didn't feel so good at the time, was I applied to be the JAMIA editor-in-chief 8 years before I actually got it. And one of the things I'd say at the time was those were 8 really important years for me. I got into much more health disparities research. I really think I cemented, some of the things I was particularly interested in from the community perspective. And in doing this, I mean, when I interviewed for the job, I said, I want to do what I'm going to call consequentialist informatics and doing what matters most. And I really felt at this point in time, because the journal was in a very good place because of Lucila's leadership, but I just said, I don't want incremental methods. We really need to be focusing on very important topics. So one of the ways I think about it, because JAMIA, of course, is interested in things that are innovative, things that are generalizable and that kind of thing. But I always think about it in context, which is, where is the state of knowledge development in a particular area? And for something like clinical decision support, we need innovation, we need generalizability. Right. We're not interested in single site studies, but there can be some stuff that is because the knowledge base is much more limited, that it could be very descriptive. So I really tried to broaden the editorial board in particular, to try to get more BIPOC on the editorial board, also paying attention to gender, but also thinking a lot about kind of scientific diversity as well. Because one of the things that I've seen, and one of the challenges, people who end up getting interested in a different type of question that might be much more of interest to a particular community, because they're not traditional quantitative science.
Right.
Often it does become more difficult. So I think very much, as, as editor-in-chief, and really making sure that, of course, it's important to have the quality there, but really to look at the breadth of scientific methods that could be applicable to address the questions. And so we have brought in, I'd say, a lot more social science.
Well, I can't wait to see with this special issue whether you get younger people who want to do critical feminist issues, or whether you get people who are no longer afraid of bringing up those issues in an informatics journal.
One of the things I'm beginning to see actually from some of our younger editorial board members, and I think it's something that could be done even more, but I've definitely been very sensitive to it. We have sent papers back to people who are simply treating race as another demographic variable and are not thinking about what it means in terms of potentially a whole history of structural racism that came into this. And it's not, they're treating it as a personal demographic variable, not the context of what that
it's not the focus
might mean.
Right.
And so I have been really pleased when I've sent back papers to people and just said, you can't treat race like this. It's a bigger thing. It's you need a more nuanced way of addressing this. We need to think systemic. We need to think structural. The revisions have been amazing. The people really stepped up to the plate, and they actually knew how to do it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, oh, I can't believe she wants this from me. These were people who had the skills to do it, but maybe didn't think. Yeah. Maybe they thought it wouldn't be appropriate to do that in an informatics journal.
I think it's academic code switching. I think that the issue is, if I want to get this paper in the New England Journal, it can't be about my specific topic. It has to be about your specific topic, and then I put my variable in it and show that there's a difference. But I don't dare go as far as to make the entire paper focused on that issue. Oliver, what questions can we answer? What questions can we answer for you that help you to feel more comfortable, or maybe to help somebody who's listening to realize that their unique situation can be addressed as a part of their career? It doesn't have to be hidden.
Oh, yeah. I guess one of the big things I've seen is recently what's been happening is with my peers, we've been having more open and frank discussions about issues surrounding race, gender, sexuality, and it's been a breath of fresh air, honestly, to be able to have those kinds of conversations. I'm wondering if either of you have seen that happen among your peers, I guess, like these very frank conversations where we just get to talk about these issues in kind of more or less a safe space, I suppose, because everyone's still learning how to talk about them and just like having the freedom to discuss and also be a listener too. It's
interesting. One of the things I wonder about is whether or not kind of the EPPE of Zoom has made it easier for some people to be able to talk about some of these things, because they're generally talking about it from at least a safe physical place. and it's not quite, so much, maybe as much in the face. I mean, I've been part of a school who's made a big commitment to this. I'm speaking on the nursing side. And when you've talked about code switching, one of the code switches I've consistently done is both going between nursing and biomedical informatics, but
right.
also going between, particularly in the early days, between a field that was predominantly male, and I was coming from a field that was predominantly female. And I did have to be careful about that, because I was in meetings that would be predominantly male, and the communication style was interruptive. You were loud. If you didn't start talking before somebody else finished, you never got heard. And then I remember one time going from a male-dominated meeting to going to a group at the American Nurses Association, one day after the other. And I came in and I had not code switched from the other meeting. And I did something and everybody was like staring at me because females in general, and I think often in the nursing community is particularly, tends to be very collaborative, have wonderful communication skills, and are very, very, I think, behave very well in group situations like that. So we can get into, I'm sorry, I ended up getting a little off topic on that, Kevin.
Well, no, but both of those points are important. And I'm thinking about the literature, a guy named Martin Kwak from the Netherlands, but also, really, Kevin, I'm gonna blank on his name. I'll have to fill this in. Not Homer Warner, but the other guy who did computer-based documentation work in the 70s with a Link computer from Wisconsin. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, no, Wes Clark. No, Wes Clark, you're talking about Warner Slack.
Warner Slack, that's the name I was trying to get.
Yeah, no, Wes Clark, who's our faculty member, Maxine Rockoff's husband, invented the Link. Actually, they did it at WashU, and then Warner Slack
took it right.
Was the one who used it to interview patients for the first time.
So let me restate this. So one of the things that you just mentioned reminded me of Warner Slack and the fact that some of the earliest studies that we did with computer-based documentation showed that when patients who had issues like depression were interviewed in ways that weren't face-to-face, they were significantly more comfortable talking about their disease. So your point about is telemedicine or are two-dimensional interfaces like Zoom in some way more democratizing, making it more comfortable if you are a person who is unique in the room to feel more comfortable with that, maybe because you're not sharing the same oxygen and just all the things that are related to it. That to me sounds like something we need to understand in our field, because that's an information receiving and giving challenge. And is Zoom in some way, to your point, Oliver, is it an easier medium for our students to use when they want to express how they feel or how they think or to be inquisitive versus face-to-face meetings?
Yeah,
you feel more comfortable in this setting?
Yeah, I think, definitely being able to have these conversations on Zoom does, I guess, make it a little bit less scary. So I guess I don't know what it is exactly, but maybe it is because you're not in the same space and everything. But I would also say, there is just this kind of cultural shift right now to, I'm not sure if those conversations will be happening in person or if it's if Zoom is a big change behind that.
I will say this to your point. I think Susan's point is really valid. What I've noticed at Vanderbilt is the conversation is going, it has a lot more energy around it. I personally, like a lot of Black people in the country, are getting a little tired of getting so invested in the opportunity for change only to see it fail once again, right? So the decision I've personally made is I want to be a part of the conversation, but I'm not leading this conversation. That I actually need majority people to lead this conversation. But what's surprising to me is that we are actually having what feels like a much more equal footing conversation. And I think you might be right about the fact that it's both who we are and the time that we're in and the medium that we are using to communicate right now that could actually allow this conversation to be a lot safer. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Were there any points in your life when you realized, I guess, to keep using the language I've been using, that it was time that you didn't have to keep your head down anymore, that it was like time to rock the boat and kind of be the person to make the change?
Absolutely. I have always, and Sue knows this about me, I've always been somebody who's kind of not afraid to be exactly who I am all the time. But around the time that I realized I was gay, I actually didn't know who to talk with, in part because there were entire parts of my personal life that knew nothing about what I was thinking. And in some ways, it was easier for me to be myself when I wasn't in my usual personal space. So at work, at meetings, I can still remember vividly at a major pediatrics meeting, we got lost and had to walk in New Orleans down Gay Bourbon Street. And I was very interested. I was very curious because I'd never been any place like that before. And one of my colleagues happened to see me and he goes, "Oh, you want to go in?" He goes, "I'm gay, let's just go on in." And I think he knew, and I haven't asked him, but I think he knew that this was a curious moment for me and that this was an important thing for him to let me experience. I would have never done that if that same meeting had been in other places. And I can also tell you another example, which was I got invited to a drag show. Sue probably remembers this too. I got invited to a drag show at the Amia Fall Symposium. So there's a drag show called Miss Adams Morgan, that's in the basement of the hotel where we stay. And I got invited to it months before I connected that this meeting and this event were in the exact same hotel. And the days leading up to going, I'm going to be on stage the next day and I'm on the board of AMIA, so I'm there all day Saturday. All I kept thinking about is, I can't be seen here. Like, this is going to ruin my career because nobody thinks of me this way. And I just was very uncomfortable. So I go to the Miss Adams Morgan thing and I'm as careful as I can be to be discreet when I go in. I take a different elevator down to the level than where the meeting is. I get in and there's like 20 people from our meeting who were in the room. And I'm with a friend of mine who could never code switch if his life depended on it. He's as gay as you could possibly look. And one of the people in the meeting, I'll just tell you, Karen and Dasha, who you guys know, and nobody else will know, but two of the people who lead AMIA came up to me and they're like, "It is so great to see you here." And we were just cutting up and we got some drinks. And it was the first time that I could actually say, to this group, well, I'm glad that my being gay isn't really an issue. And I never told anybody. And from that point on, I realized, what am I hiding? I'm not failing in this field. These people know me. And as you know well, whenever anything about yourself, if you were passing as white and you disclosed that you were Native American, whenever those things happen, you do have this issue of having a new friends group. Sometimes people redefine themselves. They don't want to be around you, and other people do. And it was so reassuring to me to find out that my AMIA community and my pediatrics community treated me literally exactly the same. And if anybody didn't, I wasn't friends with them to begin with, and I'm really fine with that. And so from that point on, I've been much more comfortable. I actually wrote an article about a kid who had a conversion reaction because he was gay and was closeted, and that's in the medical literature now. And I've certainly been much more comfortable talking about things like text messaging, telemedicine issues, and health disparities. I have zero problem now saying that's a topic I should be writing about and being very comfortable with a viewpoint about it in places where my thought can maybe make a difference.
For me, one of the things about it, because I came from such a female-dominated profession,
right,
I wasn't brought up to not behave like a woman or to kind of hide being a woman. And so when I came to Stanford, as a postdoc, I was much older. I was very differently skilled, and possibly because I was older and I'd already been a faculty member, I continued to behave like a female. And a lot of the trainees would come to me, and this happens when I came to Columbia as well, and they said, "Well, you seem to be able to, be succeeding in informatics as a woman and being successful in the broader informatics field, not just in nursing." And so I would get a lot of questions, and I still do from people, particularly from trainees, and they said, "Well, what do I do? I'm smart, but I still want to be girly," or "How do you do this?" or "How do you do that?" And and you just have to, you find your ways of being yourself. And one of the things about maturing, I think your voice gets much stronger.
right.
And even though, like I said, when we decided to do this, critical feminist theory qualitative thing, not all of the associate editors were on board with it. And I just thought, I'm the editor-in-chief.
Right.
I want to do it. And I think it's important. I think it's important to do. And
you go, girl.
then we're and we could, and we could do it. I just, I get, most of the special issue proposals I get are about, general AI in medicine and other things that we would regularly.
I was going to say, Oliver, what I'm hearing as an answer to this, as we've got to close, I know, pretty soon. First of all, I hear a couple of really good pieces of news for all of us, right? Every one of us who might be different in some way than the majority, which is to say, you're gonna succeed. You're an incredibly smart group of people, all of us, and you have to follow a little bit of your instinct, but you also have to create allies. And if we have people like the editor-in-chief of a journal or a boss who may be very much like us, we need to acknowledge, what's uncomfortable and have that person in our corner as we start to take some risks. And I think risks beget risks, right? I mean, as you get, as you learn more and more about what people can tolerate, you're going to be, and I'm going to be, and Sue's going to be much more comfortable trying the next thing. So that's my first point. I was also going to make another point, which is, if you haven't already seen it, there's a Pixar short called Pearl, P-U-R-L. And if you haven't seen it, promise me you're going to look at it in the next 24 hours, because it's phenomenal. And it actually addresses exactly what Sue just talked about and exactly what you just talked about. It's about a ball of yarn going into a workplace. And it's the way only Pixar could do it. It's got layers in terms of all the issues that you talked about, Sue. In fact, as you were saying, the whole idea that the male-dominated culture won't allow a sentence to be finished before the next person speaks. In Pearl, that happens, and this yarn has to adjust. It's very fascinating.
Well, Kevin, I thought your point was, I really listened when you started talking about risk, because we hadn't really talked so much about that. But I mentioned that my career has been a whole slew of what I would call good no's that I had wished were yeses at the time. But one of the things that I always say to people who are early in their career is, don't be afraid to take risks. And you're going to get some no's when you do it. And I think it's very important for people who are further along to take highly visible risks and to let people know when it doesn't work out. And so when I went getting for the JAMIA editorship this time, I had announced, many people knew I was going for it, but I really, and there is a Facebook Women in Informatics group. And I just, on that morning, I kind of asked my sisters and I said, I want everyone at 9 a.m., Pacific Standard Time, I want everyone to look in the direction of San Francisco and just send me your energy. And I wore my power red into that meeting, and it just felt like, I thought, this is my job, and this is my job, and I'm here to talk to you about that.
Yep. I just think that what we have to acknowledge for people like Oliver is we have a safety net. We kind of know how bad it could get. But I think if you're a brand new PhD, risks are scarier than we can imagine, because there is no safety net. And where you could end up is with debt and no job, which feels pretty scary. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is very scary. I think that is something that I worry about a lot. But I think I also want to say, having conversations like this really help me feel that, like, these risks, they're not world-ending if things don't work out.
That's right.
And I do have, people in my corner and, like, people I can talk to about what can be, kind of difficult conversations to have, but a space like this is a good space to have them, and these spaces exist in all kinds of different departments.
That's a great message. And I have to say, for people who are listening, Oliver, what's your last name?
Oh, yeah. My last name is Bear Don't Walk, and I'm part of the Crow tribe located in present-day Montana.
Right. when I first heard your name, I of course knew that you were Native American. So as opposed to certain people who can code switch, if you were brave enough to say your name is, Barack Obama went by Barry, right?
Mhm.
If you're brave enough to say I'm Oliver Bear Don't Walk, you're already 2/3 of the way there. There's no question you're not hiding anything with that name. So you should be very comfortable saying and embracing that the editor-in-chief of JAMIA would probably welcome the right kinds of pieces from you that were helping the rest of us to understand where informatics fails Native Americans, right? I think those would be fantastic papers.
Yeah, I asked him to do something over a year ago, so I connected him with someone and said, let's think about doing that. And Oliver is a JAMIA reviewer, and I sent him a piece recently that was specific to natives, but he also reviews other kinds of papers for us as well.
Yeah.
Okay,
yep,
y'all.
Still making a headway on that.
Let us know how we can help you. We're going to basically be here. But I think people listening to this, just know there are support groups. We are here to help people take risks. We will help to provide that safety net if you just reach out to us and let us do that.
I bet a new female at the Stanford alumni dinner this in this time period doesn't get asked whose wife they were, which is what happened to me at my first alumni dinner.
Yeah.
Oh.
Really? Do they really do that?
Yes. Whose wife are you?
Well, luckily nobody handed me their dishes and said, please, or refill my drink. The scary thing is, and I'm getting grief for this now, I am way too deferential. And if somebody comes up to me in a Kmart and they say, excuse me, can you tell me where I can get 2XL lingerie? I actually say, well, I don't work here, but I think it's over there where the sign is. And I don't think about it again, right? And I have friends who have said to me, I would bitch slap the people who say that to you and say, do I look like I work here, bitch? And just move on, right? I just don't do that. And I think, frankly, now that everything's happened with George Floyd, I'm actually thinking I may need to do a little bit more of that, just to kind of remind people the world isn't quite as cut and dry as you want it to be. I've also been.
It happens to me. It happens to me all the time. It happened to me in a restaurant recently that I was in with Patty Brennan, dining outside, social distancing. But I went into to use the bathroom, and a customer stopped me, and they said our table hasn't been cleaned up, and and I just figured. I'm just accustomed because I'm tall and I look like I'm in charge.
Yeah.
People just, regardless of the setting, and I was a waitress for many, many years, so I must have been walking through there with true authority.
That must be it. I just feel like it's so disrespectful. I just can't. I mean, I do it, but all I think, it's a joke, right? So I'll do these things, and then Rob and I'll go home and talk about it for an hour because I feel like what was there about me dressed like this? Not with this on, of course. That would make you think I would be that person, right? I don't even understand it, but I do it because all my life, and this is why I was saying it's the George Floydists, the anti-Black racism friends of mine look at me and say, you need to wake up and recognize this for what it is and start calling people on it. And so I may. So.
Yeah, it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, probably is. Okay, guys, take care. Have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again to Nolan, Suzanne, and Oliver. Great episode. So while Nolan and I were recording Desperado and continued talking, he also decided to play another song that I think you guys are going to fall in love with. It's become an earworm for me, but one that I happily embrace, called The Man I Used to Be. Hope you enjoy this. And again, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at KBJVanderbilt if you love this song or if you love this episode, and give me some feedback. I love feedback. Have a great rest of the day.
don't know where to start. But looking in the mirror, I can see who broke my heart. It's more than just insane when all of your tomorrows feel like lonely yesterdays. It's hard to swallow, like a pill laced with sorrow you took anyway. I used to shine so bright that I could blind the sun. I used to feel forgiven for the wrongs that I had done. Lately the light inside my eyes is hard to see, like I'm a shadow of the man I used to be. I used to be. So I step outside, light a half-smoked cigarette, and think about this life and all I've lost. When the whiskey bottle's empty, you can clearly see the cost. It's hard to swallow when there's no more time to borrow, 'cause you blew it all. Keep listening, more. I used to shine so bright that I could blind the sun. I used to feel forgiven for the wrongs that I had done. Lately the light inside my eyes is hard to see, like I'm a shadow of the man I used to be. I used to be. It ain't over yet, but it sure is hard to breathe when you're drowning in regret, 'cause there's no one left to leave. 'Cause I used to shine so bright that I could blind the sun, and I was forgiven for the wrongs that I had done. Lately the light inside my eyes is hard to see, like I'm a shadow of the man I used to be. I used to be.